The Galactic Council declared humanity dangerous. Humans called it a compliment. The central hall of the Galactic Council was a cathedral carved from starlight. Its dome, a single pane of crystallized neutron matter, hung 3 kilometers above the floor and showed the raw swirl of the Perseus arm behind it like living fire. Gravity here was negotiable. Delegates drifted in slow, graceful arcs or walked on shifting plates of invisible force. The air tasted of ozone and old incense from 1,000 alien biochemistries. Every breath felt like stepping into history. Commander Ryke Hale, Terran envoy, stood alone on the obsidian circle at the exact center of the chamber. No honor guard, no aides. Just him, the black and silver dress uniform of the United Earth Fleet, and the faintest smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. His boots were planted like he owned the place. Around him, 742 species watched from tiers that rose into shadow. Some looked like cathedrals themselves, others like storms given flesh. All of them were afraid. The High Arbiter, a towering crystalline being named Varel, whose facets refracted the light into bleeding rainbows, raised one geometric arm. Silence fell so complete that Ryke could hear his own pulse. By unanimous vote of the Greater Concordance, Varel intoned, voice chiming like glacier glass. The bipedal carbon species, self-designated Homo sapiens, is hereby classified Class Omega threat. Effective immediately, all human vessels will submit to inspection. All colonies will accept permanent oversight, and the Sol system will be placed under Containment Protocol Delta Null. Resistance will be met with annihilation. The words rolled across the hall in 400 languages at once. Translation fields shimmered in the air like heat haze. Somewhere high above, a methane-breathing delegate exhaled a plume of frozen horror. Ryke didn't flinch. He just tilted his head, the smirk blooming into a full crooked grin that had ended bar fights on 6 worlds. Class Omega, he repeated, tasting the phrase like good whiskey. That's a new one. I like it. A ripple of unease swept the tiers. The Arbiter's facets flickered crimson. Commander Hale, this is not a negotiation. Never said it was. Ryke reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately, and every defense turret in the hall tracked the motion with targeting lasers that painted red dots across his chest like a constellation of angry stars. He pulled out a small antique paper notebook and a charcoal pencil, the kind humans hadn't needed for 400 years. He flipped it open, scribbled something, then looked up with theatrical innocence. I'm just taking notes for the historians. The Arbiter's light dimmed a fraction. You mock this assembly? No, sir. Ma'am. Your Radiance. Ryke gave a shallow bow that somehow managed to look sarcastic. I'm honoring it. You just handed my species the greatest compliment in galactic history. I want to get the wording exactly right. He turned the notebook around so the front rows could see. In bold, looping handwriting he had written, Class Omega threat. Official certification that we scare the ever-living hell out of the universe. Frame it. RHL low hiss rose from the Kivra delegation, 8-legged diplomats whose silk robes rustled like dry leaves. One of them projected a psychic wave of outrage so strong that several lesser empaths in the hall clutched their skulls. Ryke kept smiling. Inside, his heart hammered so hard he was half convinced the microphones would pick it up. He'd been awake for 72 hours straight preparing for this moment. The briefing packets from Earth had been brutal. Population morale collapsing. Colony rebellions, half the outer rim ready to secede just to avoid the coming war. Humanity was fracturing under the weight of its own fear. And now the Council had just handed him a welding torch. He looked up at the crystalline Arbiter, voice dropping into something quieter, real. Tell me, Your Radiance. When was the last time this council unanimously agreed on anything? Varel hesitated. The facets shifted, scattering light like thrown diamonds. 2093 standard cycles. the Arbiter admitted. Ryke whistled low. That's a long time. And the last species you all agreed on? What happened to them? The silence that followed was a living thing. Everyone knew the answer. The Vrex, a civilization that had once spanned 30 systems. Now extinct. Wiped clean because the Council had labeled them unmanageable. Their stars were dark. Their bones were museum pieces. Ryke let the silence stretch until it hurt. Then he spoke again, softer still. So congratulations. You just told 700 races that humanity is more dangerous than the things that made you build this hall in the first place. He closed the notebook with a snap that echoed like a gunshot. I'll need the official proclamation on parchment, if you don't mind. Gold lettering would be nice. My mom always said you can't hang a holophile on the living room wall. A nervous titter escaped from the human press gallery high in the rafters. Earth journalists who weren't supposed to be there at all. Someone had smuggled them in. Ryke didn't look up, but the corner of his mouth twitched again. The Arbiter's voice cracked like breaking ice. You will show respect. Respect? Ryke stepped forward. The red dots tracked him. You want respect? Earn it. You spent 6 centuries telling us we were children. Primitive, violent, barely sapient. And every time you said it, we built something bigger, went farther, survived worse. You blockaded Mars, we terraformed it anyway. You quarantined Proxima, we still planted flags. You burned our colony on Reynolds' world to ash. His voice caught, just for half a heartbeat. The memory of ash clouds and children's voices on tight beam radio flashed behind his eyes. He swallowed it down. And we came back with flowers in our hands and a song on our lips. So yeah, call us a threat. We've heard worse from better. He spread his arms wide, palms open, daring every turret in the room. Go ahead. Shoot the messenger. Make us martyrs. See how that works out for your precious unanimity. The hall held its breath. Then, from the very back row, a single delegate began to clap. Slow, deliberate, the sound of chitin on chitin. Athese's ambassador, ancient enemy of humanity, mandibles spread in what might have been a smile. Another joined. Then a dozen. Then 100. Not all far from it, but enough that the sound became a wave, rolling down the tiers like thunder. The Arbiter's facets flared white-hot. Order! This session is adjourned! But Ryke was already moving. He spun on his heel, coat flaring like a cape, and strode toward the towering exit arch as if the hall belonged to him. Cameras followed. Every feed in the galaxy carried the image. One human walking out alone, while 700 species argued behind him. As he passed beneath the arch. He paused just long enough to glance up at the neutron glass dome. The Milky Way burned overhead, fierce and indifferent and beautiful. For a moment, just a moment, he felt something vast looking back. Not the Council. Not the stars themselves. Something quieter, older, the kind of presence that had once spoken to a shepherd boy on a hillside and told him not to be afraid. Ryke's grin softened into something almost gentle. Thanks for the assist. Boss, he whispered to no one the microphones could hear. Then he stepped into the corridor where the real war waited. And somewhere, on a million human worlds, people who had been ready to give up looked at their screens and saw one man refuse to bow. They did not cheer yet. But they stopped crying, rehook, and in the dark between stars, something ancient stirred, pleased, perhaps, that its most reckless children had finally been noticed. The Galactic Council declared humanity dangerous, humans called. In a compliment, the corridor outside the central hall was a throat of black marble and living light. Gravity here was set to 1/10 standard. Ryke walked as though wading through warm water, coat floating behind him like a battle standard. Every footstep echoed too long, as if the station itself were reluctant to let him go. He was halfway to the Terran shuttle dock when the walls rippled, and Varel stepped out of nowhere. facets dimmed to a bruised violet. The Arbiter had folded space itself to intercept him. That was not a good sign, Commander Hale. The voice was softer now, stripped of ceremony. Almost tired. Walk with me. Ryke considered refusing. He considered a lot of things. Instead, he fell into step beside the towering crystal. Hands clasped behind his back, they moved in silence for 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. At last Varel spoke. Do you understand what you have done? Pretty sure I just made myself the most famous human since Jesus, Ryke said. Or the most hated. Depends on the feed. You have turned a containment decree into a declaration of war. Ryke stopped walking. The corridor lights adjusted, bathing them both in cold white. No, he said quietly. You did that the moment you voted unanimous. I just turned the volume up. Varel's facets rotated slowly, scattering Ryke's reflection into 1,000 fractured versions of himself. You believe your species can win a war against the Concordance. I believe we can make you regret starting one. Ryke met one of the reflections, his own eyes, bloodshot, but steady. There's a difference. The Arbiter was quiet so long Ryke thought the conversation was over. Then, I have seen your kind for 600 cycles. I watched your first fusion torch crawl out of soul like a spark from a dying fire. I voted to let you live because you were beautiful. Reckless, yes, violent, but beautiful. Like a storm that sings. Ryke felt the words land somewhere behind his ribs. He kept his face neutral. Varel continued. Now the storm has teeth. And I am afraid, Commander. Not of your weapons. Of what you will force us all to become to stop you. Ryke exhaled through his nose. You still don't get it, do you? We never wanted to be your monsters. You built the cage. We just learned to pick the lock. He started walking again. Varel kept pace. Your people will rally around this insult, the Arbiter said. They will fight. They were already fighting, Ryke answered. Each other. The colonies, the core worlds, the Belt Republics, everyone tearing chunks out of everyone else because we thought we were alone. You just gave us an outside wall to stand on. They reached the observation blister, a transparent dome looking out on the Council's defense fleet. Thousands of ships hung in perfect formation, silver, gold, obsidian. Living coral, each one larger than Luna. Silent, waiting for orders that would never come. Peacefully again, Ryke rested both palms on the glass. His reflection stared back, superimposed over the Armada. You know what I see when I look out there? He asked. Power, Varel said. Graves, Ryke corrected. Pretty ones. Expensive ones. But graves all the same. He turned. For the first time the grin was gone. Give me the parchment, Your Radiance. Gold letters. Official seal. And beam it on every human channel at the same time you announce the containment. Do that, and maybe, just maybe, we all walk away from this without turning the spiral arm into a crematorium. Varel studied him. Light moved inside the crystal like slow lightning. You would gamble the survival of your species on pride? Ryke laughed once, short and sharp. Pride? No, hope. There's a difference there too. He pushed off the glass and headed for the dock. Over his shoulder he called, 48 hours, Your Radiance. Then the offer expires. After that, we do it the hard way. The Arbiter did not follow. Ryke reached the shuttle bay. The Terran courier ship Audie Murphy waited sleek, scarred, painted matte black so it wouldn't show the blood. Lieutenant Anya Volkov leaned against the ramp, arms crossed, eyes red from crying or not sleeping or both. Sir, she said, snapping a salute that trembled only a little. Feeds are exploding. Half the colonies are singing. The other half are arming. Mars just declared the Council decree, the highest honor ever bestowed on a sentient species, and voted to frame it above the Aryan Congress. Ryke climbed the ramp. Good, Tell Fleet Command to stand by for Plan Galahad. Anya's face went pale. Sir, Galahad is the suicide option. No, Ryke said, voice gentle. It's the option where we refuse to die politely. He ducked inside. The hatch sealed. Engines spun up with a growl that rattled the deck plates. As the Murphy slipped its moorings, Ryke stood at the forward viewport and watched the Council fleet recede. Beautiful ships, ancient, powerful. He thought about the wrecks again. About empty stars. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the antique notebook. Turned to a fresh page. Wrote a single line in careful block letters, DAY1, of being the monster. Let's not disappoint them. Anya's voice crackled over the intercom. Sir, incoming tight beam from Earth. It's the Pope, and the Chief Rabbi, and the Grand Mufti. They want to pray with you before we jump. Ryke closed his eyes. For a moment, the weight of 12 billion souls settled on his shoulders, like a cloak made of neutron star crust. Patch them through, he said. The cockpit lights dimmed. 3 faces appeared on the cracked forward screen, old men and women, in robes and collars and simple black suits. Exhaustion etched deep, but eyes burning. They didn't speak at first. They just looked at him. Then the Pope, small, frail, voice like dry leaves, began the Lord's Prayer in Latin. The rabbi joined in Hebrew. The Mufti followed in Arabic. Different words. Same plea. Ryke bowed his head. He didn't know the syllables anymore. Hadn't since he was 12 and his mother died on Titan. But he knew the shape of the thing. They were asking, outside the viewport. The stars blurred as the Murphy spooled its jump coils. Inside. One man stood in the dark and listened to his people beg the universe for mercy. They no longer expected to receive. When the prayer ended, silence pooled like blood. Then the Pope said, very softly, lead them home, my son. Ryke opened his eyes. They were wet, but his voice was steady. I will, he said. Or we'll build a new one out of the wreckage. Either way, we're not kneeling. The screen went dark. The jump alarm howled. And somewhere beyond the hull, space folded like paper. Rehook. 48 hours later, the parchment arrived. Gold letters. Blood red wax, and humanity laughed so hard the stars themselves trembled. The Galactic Council declared humanity dangerous. Humans called it a compliment. 37 hours and 59 minutes after Ryke left the Council station, the parchment arrived. It came in a casket of living obsidian carried by 12 honor guard drones, the size of city buses. The drones hovered above Luna's near side in perfect silence, sunlight glinting off their mirror black hulls like oil on water. Every defense battery on the moon tracked them, fingers twitching above triggers that could turn the sky white. No one fired. Orders from the top. Let it come. The casket opened on its own. Inside lay a single sheet 3 meters tall, woven from gold-threaded smart silk. The words were embossed in 412 languages. But the Terran Common version sat dead center, blazing like a sunrise. By the authority of the Greater Concordance, let I to be known to all sentients that the species Homo sapiens is hereby designated class Omega, threat level irredeemable, containment mandatory, resistance equals EXDINCTION. Beneath the text, 742 seals glowed, some crystalline, some liquid, some made of frozen screams. The Council had really gone all out. A lone figure in an EVA suit drifted out from Tycho Prime to receive it. Commander Ryke Hale, helmet under one arm, hair floating wild in the vacuum like black fire. He took the parchment with both hands, bowed with theatrical gravity, and clipped it to a magnetic tether. Then he turned to the nearest drone's camera and smiled the same crooked smile that had already become legend. Thank you, he said over open channel. My mom's gonna love this. Above the fireplace, the drones didn't answer. They simply reversed thrust and vanished into the dark like embarrassed ghosts. Ryke carried the parchment home himself. He flew it down to Geneva in the Audi Murphy. landing on the ancient UN Plaza where humanity had once argued about climate and borders. Now the plaza was packed shoulder to shoulder with millions. No screens. No holograms. They had come in person from every continent, every orbital, every colony torch ship that could burn atmosphere and time. Children sat on parents' shoulders. Old soldiers in wheelchairs clutched flags that hadn't flown in centuries. The sky above was winter blue and mercilessly clear. Ryke stepped out of the shuttle carrying the rolled parchment like Moses with the tablets. Except Moses had never looked this tired or this alive. A roar went up raw, wordless, the sound of a species remembering it. Still had teeth. He climbed the temporary stage erected where the old assembly building used to stand. Microphones waited. Cameras, the entire solar system watching. Ryke unrolled the parchment and held it high. Silence fell so fast it hurt. Then he spoke, not loud, but every word carried by 1,000 drones. "They think this is a death sentence," he said. "It's not. It's a birth certificate." The crowd inhaled as one organism. "Look at it," he continued, voice cracking just enough to prove he was human. 742 civilizations, older than our sun, looked at us and said, "These children scare us so badly we have to chain them or die." A ripple of laughter sharp, incredulous, proud. Ryke's eyes swept the sea of faces. My whole life the galaxy told us we were small, that we were accidents, that we should be grateful for the scraps they left on the table. And every time we reached for more, they slapped our hands. So we learned to take with the other hand while smiling. We learned to build in the cracks they forgot to pave. We learned to sing when they told us to shut up. He let the parchment drop. It hung in the air on smart fabric wings, rotating slowly so every soul in the plaza could read their damnation in gold. "Today," Ryke said, "they finally admitted the truth. We're not children anymore. We're the storm that learned how to aim." The roar came back louder, shaking snow from the Alps. Ryke waited for it to crest, then fall. When he spoke again, his voice was almost a whisper, but the drones carried it to the edge of the system. "I won't lie to you. Some of us are going to die. A lot of us. Maybe most. The math is ugly. But here's what they still don't understand. We've been dying since the first hominid looked up at the stars and decided the dark wasn't good enough. We died in caves, on ice, in trenches, in fusion fires. We died screaming, and we died laughing, and we died holding each other's hands. And every single time, the ones who came after picked up the pieces and kept walking." He took one step forward, boots ringing on the metal stage. "So if the galaxy wants a war, we'll give them one. Not because we love war. God knows we don't. But because surrender means teaching our children that the universe is allowed to tell them who they are." He pointed at the parchment. "That piece of paper up there? That's the last time anyone ever gets to define us from the outside." Woman in the front row, an old Martian farmer, with dust still in the creases of her face, started clapping, slow, deliberate. The sound spread like wildfire. Within seconds, the plaza was thunder. Ryke let it wash over him. Tears cut clean tracks through the grime on his cheeks, but he was grinning so wide it hurt. Later, no one could agree on exactly when the chant started. Some said the children began it. Others swore it was the veterans. But suddenly 10 million voices rose as one. "We are the threat. We are the threat." Ryke raised both fists. The parchment spun above him like a golden battle standard dot in orbit. Every ship in the Sol Defense Fleet fired its maneuvering thrusters in perfect synchronization, painting the sky with plasma fire that spelled the same 3 words in letters. 1,000 kilometers tall, "We are the threat," on Titan. Methane rains fell upward in celebration, on Luna. The artillery crews wept as they loaded shells they hoped never to fire, on Earth. In a small church in Krakow, an old priest looked up from his rosary and smiled at the crucifix. Told you they'd notice eventually, he whispered to the carved wooden Christ, who looked suddenly less abandoned. And somewhere in the Oort cloud, a single comet that should have burned centuries ago shifted course by 3 degrees, no reason. No physics, just enough to miss a human mining rig by 100 kilometers. The pilot crossed himself and laughed until he cried. Back in Geneva, Ryke stepped down from the stage. The crowd parted like water. Hands reached out, not to grab, just to touch. A child pressed a paper crane into his palm. An admiral saluted with tears streaming. A teenage girl with colony tattoos kissed his cheek and said, "Make them remember us, sir." He couldn't answer. Throat too full, he walked until he reached the edge of the plaza, where a quiet figure waited in the shadow of the old broken chair sculpture. Captain Elias Mwangi, Ryke's oldest friend, the man who'd carried him out of the Reynolds World firestorm when they were both too young to know better. Elias held out a flask. Real whiskey. Contraband from Kentucky that had survived 3 wars. They drank in silence. Finally Elias said, "You just painted a target on every human soul from here to Andromeda." Ryke wiped his mouth. "Good. Means they'll know where to find us." Elias studied him. "You still believe we can win?" Ryke looked back at the plaza, at the millions singing, at the golden death sentence spinning in the sky like a promise. "I believe," he said slowly, "that the same God who taught a carpenter to forgive from a cross also taught a shepherd boy to kill a giant with a rock. I believe he's got a sense of humor." He capped the flask and handed it back. "And I believe it's time we introduced the galaxy to both." Rehook, that night, across every human world, people hung the parchment in windows, tattooed it on skin, and carved it into hull plating while in the Council's war room. The first admiral to blink realized the storm now had a name, and it was laughing. The Galactic Council declared humanity dangerous humans, called it a compliment. War room of the Greater Concordance smelled of ozone and fear. It was buried 300 levels beneath the central hall. A sphere of absolute black where light itself had to ask permission to exist. Only the highest admirals and arbiters were allowed here. No recordings. No witnesses. Just the raw, naked pulse of empire trying to decide whether to murder a child it had once adopted. High Arbiter Varel stood at the center, facets dimmed to funeral violet. Around the circumference, holographic avatars of the Concordance's war council flickered. The Kivra matriarch, silk robes dripping venom. Grand Admiral Shar of the Thises, mandibles clicking like scythes. The living nebula called the choir, its light strobing in slow, mournful pulses. 43 of the most powerful beings alive. And every one of them looked sick. On the central display hung a frozen image, the golden parchment spinning above Geneva. 10 million humans screaming pride instead of terror. Shar broke the silence first. "They are celebrating their own extinction notice. They are celebrating being seen," Varel corrected quietly. The Kivra matriarch hissed. "Then we should blind them. I can have the 3rd suppression fleet in Sol in 9 cycles. We burn their outer colonies first. Teach the animal pain. No." The word came from the choir, a chord of 10,000 voices braided into one. "We have studied the human neural archives. Pain does not teach them submission. It teaches them accuracy." Silence again. Thicker, Varel rotated slowly, light fracturing across the sphere. "Show them." A new hologram blossomed, battle footage from Reynolds World, 23 years ago. A single human frigate, the Shanghai Noon, limping, shields gone, hull glowing cherry red. Against it, 12 Kivra dreadnoughts. The Noon should have died in the first minute. Instead it danced. It rolled through plasma fire like a drunk ballerina, venting atmosphere to spin, using its own wreckage as chaff. The captain, a woman named Amira Singh, launched escape pods filled with tungsten scrap and nuclear mines. When the Kivra closed for the kill, She rammed the lead dreadnought, cracked it open like an egg, and broadcast a song across every frequency, an old Earth ballad about a man who wouldn't stay in his grave. The dreadnoughts won. Barely. The Noon's reactor detonated and took 3 of them with it. The recording ended with Amira's last transmission, voice calm, almost amused. Tell my daughter the stars are prettier from the inside. The hologram froze on her smiling face. Admiral Shar's mandibles stilled. 1 ship, he whispered. 12,000 such engagements in the last century, Varel said. Every time we struck to punish, they learned. Every time we struck to teach, they improvised. Every time we struck to kill, they sang. The matriarch's silk robes rustled. Then we strike harder, faster, all at once. The Concordance has never lost a total war. Never fought a species that multiplies in defeat, the choir answered. Varel dimmed further. There is another way. Containment without annihilation. We seal soul, we wait. Their expansionist phase ends. They mature. The matriarch laughed a sound like tearing paper. You still believe they are children? I believe, Varel said, that children grow up. And I have begun to suspect we are the ones who never did. A new presence entered the chamber without permission. Every defense system should have vaporized it. None did that. It was small. Barely 2 meters, bipedal, skin the color of burnt copper. Eyes like dying coals. A human. The room went colder than vacuum. The figure wore simple black fatigues with no rank. A wooden cross hung at its throat, rough-hewn, old. It walked to the center of the sphere and stopped an arm's length from Varel. Evening. The human said in perfect concordance trade, voicemail, calm, carrying the faint lilt of West African French. Name's Father Lucien Okoye, Vatican Observer Corps. Thought we should talk before the shooting starts. Shar's claws extended. How did you? Trade secret, Lucien smiled. Let's just say your security owes favors to a carpenter from Nazareth. He turned slowly, taking in the circle of titans. No fear in his posture. Only sorrow. I watched the broadcast from Geneva, he said. Beautiful, wasn't it? All those people choosing pride over despair. You should be proud too. You finally gave them something bigger than themselves to love. The matriarch lunged, silk robes flaring into killing webs. Lucien didn't move. The webs stopped centimeters from his face, trembling, then retracted as if burned. Lucien's eyes never left hers. You're afraid, he said gently. Good. Fear is honest. Hate usually isn't. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small data shard. Tossed it to Varel. The Arbiter caught it instinctively. That's the real human archives, Lucien said. Not the sanitized ones you bought from the black market. Every war crime, every genocide, every time we ate our own children to survive winter. All of it. Watch it. Then decide if the species that crawled out of that mud is something you want to push into a corner. He started walking backward toward the door that shouldn't exist. Oh, and one more thing. He paused. Commander Hale asked me to deliver a message. He says if you want to talk instead of fight, you have 72 hours. After that, he stops asking nicely. The door irised open behind him. Lucien stepped through. The sphere was silent. For a long time. Finally Varel placed the shard into the central projector. The first image that appeared was Earth. 1945. A mushroom cloud rising over Hiroshima. The second was a child's shoe in the ashes of Auschwitz. The third was a human mother on Reynolds' World holding her dead son while singing him to sleep. The choir began to kina. Sound like galaxies mourning. Shar's claws retracted. The matriarch turned away. Varel watched until the weight of it crushed even crystalline bones. Then the Arbiter did something no one in that room had ever seen. It knelt. Light bled from its facets in slow, deliberate pulses. 72 hours, Varel whispered. Above them, 300 levels up. The central hall stood empty and cold. And somewhere in the dark between Earth and Luna, Father Lucien Okoye sat alone in a tiny shuttle, hands folded, praying in a language older than stars. He prayed for the aliens. He prayed for the humans. He prayed that someone, somewhere, still knew the difference between justice and vengeance. Rehook, 71 hours and 59 minutes later. The first council ship crossed the Soul containment line, unarmed, and humanity discovered that courage can be contagious. The Galactic Council declared humanity dangerous. Humans called it a compliment. The ship that crossed the line was called Resonant Lament, a choir vessel. 300 kilometers of living nebula, violet and gold, edges flickering like candle flames seen through tears. No weapons visible. No escorts. Just one immense organism drifting toward the Soul containment perimeter at sublight, broadcasting a single note in the human auditory range, a low, perfect, a minor that made dogs on Earth howl and babies stop crying. Ryke watched it come from the bridge of the dreadnought. Remember Reynolds? The remember was ugly by any standard. A blunt hammerhead of black iron and scar tissue, built from the melted-down hulls of a dozen ships that had died so others could live. Her crew called her the Cathedral because every bulkhead had a name etched into it. Someone who never came home. Ryke stood at the forward viewport, hands clasped behind his back, uniform jacket open at the throat. The choir ship filled half the sky now, close enough that he could see slow lightning crawl across its surface like thought made visible. Still no weapon signature? He asked. Lieutenant Volkov shook her head. Not even a pop gun, sir. They're singing. They always sing, Ryke muttered. Question is what verse? The A minor shifted, braided itself with harmonics, became words in perfect Terran common soft, genderless, ancient. Commander Ryke Hale, we come unarmed. We come to listen. Will you receive us? Every officer on the bridge turned to look at him. Ryke felt the old familiar ache behind his eyes. 72 hours ago, he had promised the galaxy blood if they came in force. Now they came in surrender, and it felt worse. He closed his eyes for one heartbeat. Saw his mother's face the day the colony ships left Titan. Heard the last transmission from Reynolds' world. Felt the paper crane still folded in his breast pocket. Edges soft from being touched too often. Then he opened them again. Open a channel, he said. And prep Marine on her guard. Full dress. No rifles. Anya hesitated. Sir, do it, Lieutenant. The choir voice returned, almost shy. We will send a single envoy. May we approach your hangar? Ryke exhaled. Permission granted. And welcome aboard. The Lament birthed a shuttle the size of a city block, a droplet of liquid starlight that drifted through the dreadnought's shields like they were fog. It settled onto the deck with the grace of a falling leaf. Ryke waited at the foot of the ramp with 20 Marines in snow-white dress uniforms, sabers polished until they could cut the dark. Behind them, the hangar deck crew stood at parade rest, every one of them wearing a black mourning band for someone lost. The droplet opened. A human stepped out, not metaphorically. Literally human, tall, dark-skinned, maybe 35, wearing a simple gray robe and the same rough wooden cross Father Lucien had worn. Bare feet, no pressure suit. The choir had grown him a body that could breathe vacuum and still look like home. The man smiled, small, sad, beautiful. Commander Hale, he said, voice warm with a Nairobi accent. My name is Emmanuel. The choir thought you might speak more easily to one of your own shape. Ryke's throat closed. He had expected tentacles, plasma glands, something he could hate without complication. Not this. Emmanuel walked forward until they were an arm's length apart. The Marines didn't move, but their knuckles went white on saber hilts. I've read your file, Emmanuel said softly. Reynolds World, Titan evacuation. The Battle of the Belt. You lost your entire platoon on Ganymede, holding a civilian transport for 6 extra minutes. 6 minutes that saved 4,000 children. Ryke's voice came out rough. You didn't come here to recite my medals. No, Emmanuel agreed. I came to ask a question the Council is too proud to ask. He looked past Ryke to the Marines, to the names etched on the walls, to the black bands on every arm. How much more dying is enough? Ryke laughed once, short, ugly. You think we want this? I think you're very good at it, Emmanuel replied. And I think you're tired. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the low thrum of the Remember's reactors. Ryke turned away first. Walked to the nearest bulkhead. Traced one name with his fingertip, Maria Hale, LT, age 28. My sister, he said to the medal. She was on Reynolds World when your friends glassed it. She broadcast lullabies to the shelters until the atmosphere caught fire. He turned back. So you'll forgive me if I'm fresh out of forgiveness today. Emmanuel's eyes filled not choir light, real tears. The matriarch who gave that order took her own life last night. The choir sings her name in mourning now. We are not monolithic, Commander. Some of us remember what mercy feels like. Ryke stared at him for a long moment. Then he did something no one on the bridge expected. He knelt, not in surrender. In exhaustion, right there on the deck plates. In front of God and cameras and 20 hardened Marines. Commander Ryke Hale folded to his knees and pressed his forehead to the cold metal. Where his sister's name was carved, the Marines froze. Anya started forward, then stopped. Ryke spoke to the floor. I don't know how to stop, he whispered. Every time I try to put the gun down, someone hands me a bigger one. Emmanuel knelt too, so they were eye to eye. Then let us help you carry it, he said. Not take it away. Carry it with you. Until the day comes when you can set it down without the sky falling. Ryke looked up. Tears cut clean lines through the grime on his face. What do you want? He asked, voice raw. 3 things, Emmanuel said. First, a ceasefire. Real one. No inspections, no overseers. Just silence on the guns. Ryke waited. Second, a summit. Not here, not on neutral ground. On Earth, in the place where you hung the parchment. Let the galaxy see what it tried to kill. And third, Emmanuel reached out and touched the wooden cross at his own throat, then gently laid his hand over Ryke's heart. Third, he said, let us pray together. Not for victory, for wisdom. Because I think the one who made both our kinds is weeping right now, and someone needs to say sorry first. Ryke stared at the hand on his chest, felt the warmth of it through the uniform, through the scar tissue, through 20 years of rage. He covered Emmanuel's hand with his own. 72 hours, he said. You have 72 hours to get every Admiral Matriarch and Nebula Choir that voted for our extinction to stand in that plaza in Geneva and look my people in the eye. If even one of them refuses, the deal's off and we finish this the hard way. Emmanuel smiled, small, hopeful, terrified. 72 hours, he agreed. Ryke stood. Wiped his face with the heel of his hand. Then he turned to his Marines. Escort our guest to quarters, he ordered. Best we have. Real coffee. Real gravity. And if anyone lays a finger on him, I'll space them myself. The Marines snapped salutes that rang like gunshots. As Emmanuel walked away between ranks of white uniforms. Ryke caught Anya's eye. Get me Earth, he said quietly. Tell them we're bringing the galaxy home for dinner. Anya grinned through tears. Yes, sir. Should I tell the Pope to set extra places? Ryke barked a laugh that hurt his throat. Tell him to set 742. And tell him to bring the good wine. Rehook, 72 hours later. The first alien delegation stepped onto Terran soil unarmed. And the golden parchment above Geneva, began to look less like a death sentence and more like an invitation. The Galactic Council declared humanity dangerous. Humans called it a compliment. They came down in waves. Not fleets. First the choir, a ribbon of living aurora that wrapped itself around the stratosphere like a promise. Then the vises, 20 obsidian scarabs the size of mountains, descending on pillars of blue fire. The Kivra arrived last, 8-legged dreadnoughts unfolding into cathedral-shaped landers that settled on the Swiss plains with the delicacy of falling snowflakes. Every ship broadcast the same message in every human language: we come in peace. We come to listen. Geneva had never been so quiet. The city had been evacuated of all but essential personnel 3 days earlier. Now the streets were lined with silent millions again, but this time no one cheered. They simply watched, breath fogging in the January air, as the most powerful beings in the galaxy walked onto the same cobblestones where humans once argued about carbon taxes. The summit was not held in a conference hall. It was held in the open plaza beneath the golden parchment. A simple wooden table had been set in the exact spot where Ryke had stood a week earlier. 12 chairs on the human side, 12 on the alien. No thrones, no dais, just scarred oak and the cold alpine wind. Ryke arrived first, wearing the same black dress uniform, but the silver thread insignia had been replaced by a small wooden cross, the one Emmanuel had pressed into his hand the night they met. He did not sit. He stood behind his chair and waited. One by one the others came. Father Lucien Okoye, smiling like a man who had won a bet with God. Admiral Fatima Al-Khail, hero of the Belt War, face carved from stone. Dr. Li Wei, the physicist who weaponized prayer unofficially. And 8 more, soldiers, poets, farmers, mothers, children of every creed and colony. Across from them came the 12. Varel, facets dimmed to soft pearl. The Kivra matriarch, silk robes replaced by plain gray mourning cloth. Shar, mandibles bound in silver wire, Thysa's sign of penance. Emmanuel, still wearing the human shape, eyes luminous with choir light. The rest followed, beings of crystal, storm, coral, and song. They sat. For a long minute, no one spoke. The only sound was the wind moving the parchment overhead, gold threads glinting like captive sunlight. Then Ryke leaned forward, elbows on the table, and spoke the first words of the summit. My sister's name was Maria, he said. She was 28. She liked terrible coffee and old jazz. She died screaming while your fleets burned the air off her planet. I want you to say her name. Silence. The matriarch's legs twitched. Shar's bound mandibles clicked once. Varel's facets shifted to a color no human had ever seen before, something between grief and starbirth. Maria, the arbiter said at last, voice cracking like glacier ice. Maria Hale. Ryke nodded once, sat down. Father Lucien reached into his robe and pulled out a loaf of bread and a bottle of red wine. Simple, earth-made. He broke the bread, poured the wine into 12 plain cups, and passed them across the table. This is older than any of us, he said quietly. We do this in remembrance. Some delegates understood. Some did not. But every single one, alien and human, took the cup when it was offered. They drank. Then the matriarch did something no human had ever seen. A Kivra do. She wept. Not the psychic projection they used for theater. Real tears, clear and viscous, dripping from her chalicerie onto the wooden table where they hissed and smoked. I ordered the burning of Reynolds' World, she said, voice a broken thread. I watched the infrared bloom and told myself it was necessary. I have not slept since your priest showed me the children. She reached into her mourning robe and drew out a small silk pouch. Opened it. Inside was a single child's shoe, charred, tiny, impossibly human. I kept this, she whispered, as a reminder of what monsters look like. She laid it on the table between them. Admiral Al-Khail stared at the shoe for a long Time. Then she reached into her own pocket and pulled out a Thyse's honor blade, short, curved, stained dark with old blood. She laid it beside the shoe. I used this on prisoners at Lagrange 4, she said. After you glassed our colony at Epsilon Eridani. I told myself it was justice. One by one, objects appeared on the table. A choir memory crystal containing the death scream of an entire human battalion. A data shard with the execution orders for 3 Kivra pacifists who protested the war. A human child's drawing, crayon son, stick figure family. Words scrawled beneath. Come home soon. Daddy. The table became an altar of shame. When every delegate had placed their offering. Ryke stood again. He walked around the table until he stood behind the matriarch. For a moment every human tensed, hands drifting toward concealed weapons. Ryke laid both hands on her carapace, gently. Like a son, I forgive you, he said. The matriarch shuddered so hard her legs scraped grooves in the stone. He moved to Shar, placed a hand on the bound mandibles. I forgive you. To Varel. To Emmanuel. To every alien at the table, I forgive you. Then he returned to his side and looked at his own people. Fatima al-Khail was crying openly now. Ryke met her eyes. And you forgive us, he told the humans. For every time we answered horror with horror. For every time we forgot why we started fighting. Dr. Li Wei bowed his head. We forgive, he whispered, and the words rippled down the line. The wind shifted. The parchment overhead caught the sunlight and blazed like a second sun. Varel rose, slowly, carefully, and walked to the human side. Knelt, crystal knees ringing against stone, and placed its geometric forehead against Ryke's boots. We were wrong, the arbiter said. Voice carrying to every corner of the plaza, to every feed across the galaxy. You are not the threat. We were. Ryke reached down and raised Varel up. No, he said gently. We all were. That's the point. He turned to the millions watching. Then he did the thing that would be remembered 10,000 years later. He took the matriarch's hand, 8 fingers, venom glands carefully capped, and Shar's claw, and Varel's crystalline arm, and Emmanuel's human palm, and he raised them, high. Together. The plaza held its breath. Then a child, couldn't have been more than 6, red mittens and a gap-toothed grin, broke from the crowd and ran forward. She tugged on Ryke's coat. He knelt. She whispered something only he could hear. Ryke's eyes filled. He stood and faced the aliens again. She wants to know, he said, voice cracking. If you'd like to stay for dinner. Her mom makes the best spaghetti in Geneva. For one heartbeat the galaxy hung suspended. Then the matriarch laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of glass and regret. Yes, she said. We would like that very much. Re-hook, that night. Beneath a sky full of alien ships and human hope. The golden parchment was taken down, and in its place they hung something new. A single white sheet with 12 handprints, human and alien, pressed together in red paint. And beneath it, in a child's careful scrawl, Welcome home. The Galactic Council declared humanity dangerous humans called. In a compliment they stayed for 3 days. 3 days in which the city of Geneva became the strangest pilgrimage site in history. The Thyses delegation slept on the roof of the Cathedral of St. Pierre because they could not bear enclosed spaces after centuries in vacuum. The choir drifted above Lake Lehman at night, turning the water into a mirror of galaxies. Kivra younglings, spindly, curious, venom sacs still soft, were carried on the shoulders of Swiss guards while they learned to ice skate on the frozen rain. Children taught them how to make snow angels. The Kivra taught the children how to weave silk strong enough to stop a bullet. No one gave orders. No one needed to. Ryke Hale did not sleep. He moved through the city like a ghost in black, shaking claws, touching crystalline facets. letting eight-legged matriarchs press their foreheads to his in the Kivra gesture of deepest apology. He ate fondue with Avise's admiral who had once sworn to bathe in human blood. He stood on the jet d'eau at midnight while Emmanuel the choir wearing human skin sang an old Swahili lullaby that made the water dance. On the second night he found Father Lucian on the broken chair sculpture, legs dangling over the void where one leg had been blown off centuries ago. The priest offered him a flask of something that smelled like communion wine and rocket fuel. Ryke drank. "You look," Lucian said gently, "like a man who just discovered the war is over and isn't sure what to do with his hands." Ryke stared out over the city. Alien ships hung above the rooftops like strange new constellations. Somewhere below, a human child was laughing in 8-part Kivra harmony. "I spent 20 years learning how to kill them," he said. "I'm not sure I remember how to live with them." Lucian was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "There's a story from the desert. A man carries his enemy across burning sand because the enemy is wounded. When they reach shade, the enemy asks why. The man says, 'The war between us is not inside me.'" Ryke closed his eyes. "I want to believe that. God help me, I do. But every time I blink I still see Reynolds' world burning." Lucian placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then let them help you carry the memory. That's what forgiveness actually looks like. It isn't forgetting. It's choosing not to pass the fire on." Ryke laughed, raw and ragged. "When did you get so wise, Father?" "About the time a nebula asked me to teach it the Hail Mary," Lucian said. And they both laughed until they couldn't breathe. On the third day, they gathered again in the plaza. This time not 12 and 12, but thousands. Delegates, journalists, children, soldiers, priests, imams, rabbis, monks, and one very confused Buddhist lama who had hitched a ride on a choir transport because he wanted to see what compassion looked like at galactic scale. The golden parchment was gone. In its place hung the white sheet with the handprints, now joined by thousands more. Human palms, Vise's claws, Kivra legs dipped in paint. Choir light pressed into pigment that still glowed softly. Varel stood beneath it and spoke not as High Arbiter, but as a being who had learned to be small. "We came to chain you," the crystalline voice rang out, gentle now. "You taught us to unlock ourselves." The matriarch stepped forward next. She carried something wrapped in plain silk. She actually knelt before Ryke and offered it up with all 8 arms trembling. He unwrapped it. Inside was the original parchment, the one that had declared humanity a threat. The gold threads had been carefully unpicked and rewoven into something new, a single word in every language of the concordance, repeated in a spiral that hurt to look at directly. The word was mercy. The matriarch's voice was barely a whisper, but the plaza carried it to every corner. "We do not deserve this," she said, "but we will spend the rest of our cycles trying to become worthy of it." Ryke took the new tapestry in both hands. It weighed almost nothing and everything at once. Then he did the only thing he could think of. He hung it beside the handprint sheet. 2 banners now flew above Geneva, one born of fear, transformed into mercy, one born of blood, transformed into welcome. The crowd, human and alien together, did not cheer. They simply breathed. A single shared exhale that sounded like the universe itself letting go of a held breath 10,000 years long. That afternoon, Ryke finally slept. He woke at dusk to find Emmanuel sitting beside his cot in the temporary barracks, human face lit by the soft glow of the choir within. "I have a confession," the envoy said softly. Ryke rubbed his eyes. "You're actually a Vises in disguise?" "Worse." Emmanuel smiled. "The choir has been watching your species for longer than your planet has had oxygen. We stayed silent because we were afraid of what love might demand of us." Ryke sat up slowly. "And now?" "Now," Emmanuel said, We are more afraid of what silence has already cost. He reached out and touched the wooden cross at Ryke's throat, the one that had once belonged to Father Lucien. Then to Emmanuel, now to him. The one you call God, Emmanuel whispered, has many names, but only one heartbeat, and it is tired of funerals. Ryke felt the words settle in his chest like warm lead. What happens next? He asked. Emmanuel stood. The light inside him brightened until the room was full of dawn. Next, he said, we go home together. All of us, and we start learning how to be neighbors instead of nightmares. Ryke rose too. For the first time in weeks, his hands did not shake. Outside. The sky was full of ships leaving, not in formation, not in fear, but in procession. A funeral cortege in reverse, carrying life instead of death. Ryke stepped onto the balcony and watched them rise. A small hand slipped into his. The 6-year-old girl from the first day, the one who had asked the aliens to stay for spaghetti, looked up at him with solemn eyes. Will they come back? She asked. Ryke knelt so they were eye to eye. Yeah, kid, he said, voice rough with everything he hadn't cried yet. They'll come back. And next time, we'll have better spaghetti. She considered this, then nodded once very serious and ran off to rejoin her mother. Ryke stayed on the balcony long after the last ship vanished into jump. The stars looked different. Now. Not conquered. Not afraid. Just. Waiting. He touched the cross at his throat. Somewhere in the dark between galaxies, something vast and quiet and ancient smiled the way a father smiles when his children finally stop fighting long enough to look at each other. Rehook. And 10,000 years later, when schoolchildren, some with claws, some with crystal bones, some with lungs full of nebula, asked how the great peace began, their teachers would point to a single photograph, one exhausted human soldier standing between a spider and a star, holding both their hands, while behind him 2 banners flew side by side, proof that even the worst of us can choose, in the end, to be the best of us. The Galactic Council declared humanity dangerous. Humans called it a compliment. 10,000 years later, the photograph still hung in the grand atrium of the Concordance capital now. A living world called Irene that orbited a gentle, yellow sun no one had ever tried to weaponize. The atrium itself was a forest of crystal and water and song. Trees grown from Kivra silk and Thyses bone arched overhead. Choir light drifted like pollen. Children of every shape chased one another through streams that flowed upward as often as down. And at the very center, suspended in a sphere of perfect stillness, was the image, Ryke Hale, eyes red from crying, uniform torn at the shoulder, holding the claw of matriarch Vera and the facet hand of Arbiter Varel the younger, grand offspring of the original. Behind them, the 2 banners, the rewoven mercy and the paint-stained welcome home. Every child on Irene learned to read by tracing the letters on those banners, but stories are never finished. They only change tellers. On the 10,000th anniversary of the Geneva Accord, a new delegation arrived at Irene. Not in triumph. In fear. They came from the far rim, a cluster of systems that had never signed the accord. For 10 millennia they had watched from the dark, growing in silence, nursing old wounds. Their ships were black, angular, built for ambush and disappearance. Their species had no name the Concordance recognized, only a sound, a low grinding click that translated roughly as the unforgiven. They sent a single message on every channel. We remember what you forgot. The humans are still a threat. We will finish what our ancestors lacked the courage to complete. The message ended with archived footage, Reynolds' world burning, Hiroshima blooming, the child's shoe on the Geneva table. Across Irene, the trees stopped singing. In the council chamber, now a circle of living wood opened to the sky. 12 new delegates gathered. Only 3 were human. The rest were Thyses, Kivra, Choir, crystalline descendants of Varel's line. They had no high arbiter anymore. Decisions were made by consensus in song. A young Kivra archivist named Lirsha 8 legs painted with the handprints of her human Creshmate stood first. They're using our history as a weapon, she clicked, voice trembling. They want us to be ashamed of peace. An elderly Thyses warrior, Sharkin, direct descendant of the admiral who once bound his mandibles in penance, rasped, then we remind them whose history it actually is. The choir representative, a Nebula child who had never known war, pulsed in soft alarm. We have no fleets anymore. We melted the guns. We turned the shipyards into gardens. A human woman rose last. Captain Mara Hale, descendant of Ryke and of Father Lucian both. She wore the same wooden cross that had passed from throat to throat for 10,000 years. Her eyes were the exact storm gray of the man in the photograph. We still have one weapon, she said quietly. The only one that ever actually worked. She touched the projection of the photograph, zooming until Ryke's tired, tear-streaked face filled the chamber. Courage, she said. And memory. They sent no armada. They sent one ship, a small, antique courier built from the salvaged hull plates of the old Remember Reynolds. Its name was Mercy's Child. It carried 12 souls, one of each people who had sat at the Geneva table, and one more. An AI that held the complete, unedited memory of every atrocity, every forgiveness, every song sung in the dark. They jumped to the edge of the Unforgiven cluster and broadcast on open channel. We are the children of the ones who terrified you. We are also the children of the ones you terrified. Come and talk. Or come and fight. Either way, we will not look away. The Unforgiven answered with silence. Then with weapons. The first salvo should have erased Mercy's Child from existence. It never arrived. Instead, every warhead detonated early, blooming into silent white flowers of plasma that spelled, across 1,000 kilometers of vacuum, a single word in the Unforgiven's own grinding language. Mercy. The Unforgiven fleet hesitated. In that hesitation, Mercy's Child drifted forward, shields down, weapons cold, and opened its only hangar bay. Inside stood Mara Hale, alone, in simple black fatigues. No armor, no escort. Just the wooden cross and 10,000 years of practiced hope. She stepped into the void. No suit. Only a thin personal field, and waited. After a silence long enough to birth stars. A single Unforgiven stepped out to meet her. It was tall, angular, plated in obsidian chitin. Its face was a mask of blades. Where eyes should have been, there were only voids. It raised a weapon that could have carved moons. Mara did not flinch. She reached into her pocket and drew out the original child's shoe, the one the matriarch had placed on the table in Geneva. It had been preserved in stasis for 10,000 years, still charred. Still tiny, she held it out. The Unforgiven stared at the shoe for a long time. Then, very slowly, it lowered the weapon. It reached with one clawed hand and took the shoe. Turned it over. Traced the scorched edge where a child's name had once been stitched. A sound came from the voids where eyes should have been, not the grinding click of its language, but something older. Something that might have been a sob if its species had ever evolved. Tears. Mara spoke. Voice carried by the thin field into vacuum and into every speaker on every ship. My ancestor carried your ancestor's fear across a table and turned it into bread and wine. I'm offering you the same choice. You can carry that shoe as a trophy, or as a promise. The Unforgiven looked from the shoe to her face. Then it did the thing no one in the Concordance fleet dared hope for. It knelt. Not in submission. In recognition. Across the Unforgiven fleet, weapons powered down. Engines went cold. Mara stepped forward and placed her hand on the creature's bowed head. Behind her, the choir began to sing, not victory, not triumph, but the same low A minor that had opened the first ceasefire 10,000 years before. One by one, the unforgiven ships joined the song, their grinding clicks weaving into harmony none of them had known they possessed. When it ended, the silence was gentle. Mara helped the unforgiven stand. What is your name? She asked. It took a long time to answer. When it did, the word was clumsy in its mouth, as if tasting something new. Hope, it said, rehook, and on earring. Beneath the photograph that had watched 10,000 years of peace, the trees began to sing again, this time in a language that had once meant only vengeance, now braided forever with mercy. The Galactic Council declared humanity dangerous. Humans called it a compliment, 100,000 years after the photograph was taken. The concordance no longer counted years. Time had become a river with many mouths, and the peoples who lived along its banks had learned to speak in light, in song, in the quiet spaces between heartbeats. There were no more borders. There were gardens that drifted between stars, schools where children with crystal bones learned to laugh in 8-part Kivra harmony, and cathedrals grown from the fused hulls of warships that had once tried to kill one another. The original plaza in Geneva was now a meadow floating in orbit above old Earth, kept forever green by choir light and Thies's irrigation. The two banners still flew, mercy and welcome home, though the fabric had long since turned to something that was neither silk nor memory, but both. They never frayed. They never faded. Some said the handprints glowed brighter when children were born. On the 100,000th anniversary of the day the unforgiven knelt, a pilgrimage arrived. They came in a single ship made of night and forgiveness, the last vessel of the unforgiven, now called Hope's Child. Its hull was no longer black. It had been repainted by generations of younglings with every color that had ever meant joy. Inside walked a single figure. Old. Terribly, beautifully old, skin like weathered bronze, hair gone silver white, eyes the same storm gray that had stared down extinction twice. He moved slowly, leaning on a staff carved from the wood of the original Geneva table. At his throat hung the wooden cross, worn smooth now, edges rounded by 100,000 years of touch. Ryke Hale, not a clone, not a copy. The same man. No one knew how. Some said the choir had sung him across time. Some said the cross had simply refused to let him die until the story was finished. Some said God had looked at the man who taught the galaxy mercy and decided one lifetime was not enough. Ryke walked the orbital meadow. Alone, he passed beneath the banners and stopped at the place where he had once stood with alien hands in his. The grass remembered his boots. It bent in the shape of them, as if the ground itself had been waiting. He knelt, slowly, joints protesting, and pressed one palm to the earth. I kept the promise, he whispered to the dirt, to the stars, to every soul who had ever bled or forgiven. They came home. A wind moved through the meadow, gentle, warm, carrying the scent of pine and distant oceans. The banners stirred. The handprints glowed. From the edge of the meadow, children watched, human, Thies's, Kivra, unforgiven, choir-born, and 100 shapes no one had named yet. They did not approach. They simply stood in silence, as children do when they feel something too large for words. Ryke looked up at the sky. Old Earth turned beneath him, blue and wounded and healing. Mars glowed red gold with forests. Titan's rings caught the sun like a wedding band. And farther out, past the heliopause, the great river of the Milky Way poured itself into the dark, carrying gardens and songs and cities, made of light. He smiled, the same crooked grin that had once terrified 700 civilizations. Then he did the last thing anyone expected. He lay down in the grass, right beneath the banners, and closed his eyes. The children waited. The meadow waited. The galaxy held its breath. When Ryke Hale opened his eyes again, he was not looking at the stars. He was looking up into a face he had not seen in 100,000 years. Maria, 20-8 years old, untouched by fire, eyes bright with jazz and terrible coffee. She wore the same uniform she had died in, but there were no burns now. Only light. She smiled the way she used to when he was 8 and scraped his knee. "Took you long enough. Little brother." Ryke reached up, no pain now. No age, and took her hand. Behind her stood others, his mother. His father. The 4,000 children from Ganymede. Amira Singh with her crooked captain's grin. The matriarch Vera, silk robes whole again. Sharkin, mandibles unbound and laughing. Father Lucian, younger than Ryke had ever seen him, eyes dancing. Emmanuel, light and flesh braided together into something new. And farther back, countless more, every soul who had ever carried the fire, and chosen to pass bread instead. They did not speak, they simply opened a way. Ryke stood. The staff fell from his hand and became flowers. The cross at his throat unfolded into wings of soft wood and older mercy. He looked once more at the children. Watching from the edge of the meadow, he raised one hand, not in farewell, but in blessing. Then he walked forward into the light that had always been waiting. The banners caught a wind. No one felt and turned. On the mercy side, the golden threads rearranged themselves one final time. The word did not change. It simply opened, the way a flower opens at dawn, revealing something beneath that had always been there. "Thank you," and on the welcome home banner, every handprint, human, claw, crystal light, and void, flared once, bright as birth, then settled into quiet glow. The children felt it first, a warmth in their chests, a certainty older than language. The story was finished, not ended, finished. Across the meadow, across the worlds, across every place where sentient hearts beat, a single quiet note sounded, the same low A minor the choir had sung when it first crossed the line into soul. It was not a song of triumph. It was a lullaby, and somewhere, in the heart of all things, the one who had watched a reckless species choose mercy over vengeance, 100,000 times smiled the way a father smiles when the last lost child finally walks through the door. The meadow orbited on, the banners flew, the photograph in the grand atrium of Irene, now older than most civilizations, captured one more moment no camera had been there to see. Ryke Hale, young again, walking hand in hand with his sister beneath two banners that no longer needed to speak, because every living soul already knew the words by heart, and the galaxy, scarred, beautiful, forgiven, and forgiving, kept turning, kept singing, kept choosing. Again and again, the harder and truer path, because once, a very long time ago, a tired man with storm-gray eyes looked at the worst the universe could do and answered with bread, with wine, with an outstretched hand, and with 4 quiet words no empire had ever managed to silence. "We are the threat, and we choose mercy." Final line, spoken by the wind itself, for anyone still listening. They called it madness. He called it Monday. And God, quiet, vast and smiling, called it enough.